Hi, everyone. This is Tracy from the Fairborn Library here at the Greene County Public Library System, here to talk to you about how to research overlooked and often forgotten records for people who are in institutions. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? So, overlooked but not forgotten, how to research institutional records. First off, we need to know what types of records there are. There are hospital, infirmaries, prisons, orphanages, schools, and fraternal organizations. All of these have different agencies that ran them, and depending on which agency they had run them, how many records are still around and how accessible are they. As you can see, most of them were either private, non-for-profit, run by the government, militaries, churches, local houses, and some even had different names to look up, like orphanages, for example. They may have been poorhouses or almshouses, and they may have been run by the church. So keep this in mind when you're looking at the different types of records. Keys to finding them when researching. Typically, government records, ones that were run by the cities, states, and the federal government, are easier to look for. Depends on the retention records. Some places keep records for a few years before they're destroyed. Some keep them for a long time before they're destroyed. There's also the issue of privacy, which we'll get to in a minute. Where else to look for the records? You can look for physical and digital locations of the records. Where were they originally stored at? In the actual hospital or prison, court? Did it change hands? Was it sold? Did it change names? Did it merge with someone else? Was it closed? Where is it now? All of these places are going to be places you want to look to find your records. To access these records, they're a little more difficult to access than your typical census records. A lot of institutions won't allow the public to look at these, especially with information pertaining to medical records. Some places have time frames, just like the census. After so many years, they can be reviewed, others don't. And there are usually exceptions to the rules. If you're looking for a specific person and they're deceased, you're the heir, or there's legal requirements to release the information, such as estate settling and stuff like that, or matters of public records, such as court records, jail records, things like that, you may be able to get access to them where the typical public would not be able to. Third key to remember, terminology has changed a lot over the years. What was acceptable then may not be an acceptable term now. Deaf and dumb is not acceptable now, but at the time, that's what it was listed as on the census records. So be sure to research all of the terms, and don't be surprised if you see something that would be considered a little offensive now. So how do you even know you need to look for these records? First clue is on the location on other records, such as a place of death, a place of birth, residence at the time of a census or major event, mentioning in a newspaper, residence during a census, yearbooks, grade cards, diplomas. I'll give you ideas of places to look. Hints in newspapers. Answers to the questions in the census is listed below. If they were listed as deaf and dumb or idiotic or any of those types of questions, you know you need to look at other institutional records to see if there's any more information available to you. The 1880 defective, dependent, and delinquent schedules were also good places to look for more information. And some of your state and local censuses in the off years may also have questions like this, depending on what state you're in. So if you're looking at any of these things and you see a clue that doesn't seem quite like the rest of your family, you may want to research and look and see if you can find something else. So the different types of records: hospital, asylum, and orphanages and county homes. These are hard to access because of the personal and medical information they contain. What you can access usually are death records. And in some cases, you can find day books that have been published online, Google Books. Some have been scanned through Family Search or Ancestry, published histories, allowances, which were part of the budgets which were typically published, institutional cemeteries, annual reports that were given, especially if it was a for-profit. You had to answer to those stockholders, so they had a lot of information about the daily runnings of the business. So you can get an idea of how the overall institution was run, maybe not necessarily about specific people. Your biggest clue is going to be applications or admission records, admission registration records. These are typically available if you can find them as a published item. You wouldn't be able to necessarily sort through by person. You'd have to kind of scroll through everything and look at them. And government-run organizations tend to be more open with their records than private institutions, which is just typically how it is. Veterans and their families, you may be able to find information in their medical records and personnel files. And admission records, again, tend to be the most useful for genealogists. School records. There were schools for the deaf and blind. There were schools for mental illness and developmental disabilities. You can look at yearbooks. A lot of these are now being published online. Alumni directories, class registries, deaths, information in newspapers. Think of like your senior send-offs and class pictures of the senior class, things like that get published that you may have family mentioned in to give you an idea of where to go to look for what school they were in, what area they lived in, etc. And don't forget to look for Sunday schools and colleges, universities, and cultural schools as well. Jails and prison records. These are considered public record, most of them, and they lead you to find other records, such as the court reportings, newspaper articles. Check the deaths in cemeteries. Now, during the time they had different levels of jails. Your local jail could have everything from being held in debt because you had a debt, holding for another locality, sobering up, cooling off. So just because they were in jail didn't mean they actually did time and there was a court proceeding following it. State and federal prisons usually had a little more information behind them. And what's interesting about them, if you can find them, are these Bertlin records, where you can actually see photos of inmates and their fingerprints. And be sure to check pardon rolls and execution lists too. So how can you find these records? As I said, these are a lot harder to find than your typical ancestry search. The best place to start with is this institution itself. Where were they? Is it still there? Has it changed names? Has it been purchased by another organization? Start tracking it down. So once you find on the census that they were living at a school for the deaf, you can start at the school for the deaf and look. Check the state archives, see what has been sent to them, or your state library. Check your local historical society, your public library, if they have an in-depth local history, check there. Online sites, like I mentioned, Family Search and Ancestry are starting to get some of these records. A lot of them are not searchable. You have to scroll through like you did with old census records and look at every one. ArchiveGrid, Percy's, county web pages, county histories, that'll usually have a history of the institution, so you can just get an idea of what life was like. These records are hard to search, and you're probably going to have to make phone calls and actually go visit somewhere to see them. Most of the information is going to lead you to other information and documents to find. You're not going to find all the answers looking at these, but you will get a richer picture of who you're learning about. So hopefully this is something you would be interested in trying, and let us know how it goes.